Welcome to Giants Nation player profiles and projections. I'm your host, Bobby Skinner, here with my co-host, and today, my co-host, Football Grump. I almost just gave you no name. Today, we're here with tight end Daniel Bellinger and defensive tackle Dexter Lawrence. As always, we start with the offense. Daniel Bellinger, 6'5", 253 pounds, 24 years old, fourth round pick in 2022. He was a rookie starter, and he enters his year four as his third year as a backup. Last year was a career low with 14 catches and 125 reception yards. He had his lowest role in the NFL. Year one, he was a starter. Year two, despite being a backup, played a lot. And year three was their number three tight end behind Theo Johnson and Chris Manhertz. In fact, he had 3 catches last year before Theo Johnson got hurt, and then finished the last 5 games as a starter with 11 catches and 94 yards. He played 17% of the snaps before Theo Johnson got hurt. And then when Theo Johnson went down, he became the starter. So he goes from tight end 3 to tight end 1 when tight end 1 gets injured, which we'll talk about. But his role is significantly decreased if everybody stays healthy, Grump.
Yeah, and his production has went down too. So in 2022, he even had an eye injury in which he missed time for, and he still had 38 targets for 290 yards and 3 touchdowns. 2023 down to 28 targets and just 255 yards. And then last year, 14 targets for 125 yards. No touchdowns since his rookie year, I think. One thing you can say about him, though, is sure-handed. So, I mean, like, as we talk about Daniel Bellinger and his reduced role, and, one thing that also has to be kept in mind, he's on track to make $3.6 million this year. He's kind of become a little bit of a what's the opposite of a fan favorite without being like a complete bust, whatever that is. That he's just kind of grown on the side of Giants fans to be like, what can we get for him, or how are we moving on from him? And I think that he's better than that. But it is without question, and it's very, very clear that his role on this team and in this offense has diminished since the moment he walked in the door.
Yeah, and listen, I understand it, right? Like, I was the guy after his rookie year being like, I think he's a little overrated. And then after, going into this season, I'm like, hey, I think you guys are underrating him a little bit and what he is, when you're just like, well, we'll just keep Fedoni or Greg Dulcich, like, cut Daniel Bellinger. Because the reality is, with Theo Johnson on this team, Theo Johnson's your starting tight end. And when Theo Johnson's your starting tight end, the Giants prefer to use Chris Manhertz because of Chris Manhertz's inline blocking ability, despite the fact that Chris Manhertz is a 0 as a receiver. Like, he's legitimately nothing as a wide receiver, as a receiver. I think he has less than 100 receiving yards in his career. So you'd say, oh, well, he's tight end 3 and he's making that much money. That doesn't make any sense. The issue is, in reality, he's tight end 2. Because if Theo Johnson gets injured, he's the starting tight end. He's the only tight end on the roster who can block and catch. Where you have Greg Dulcich, who's, fast, but he can't block, and he's also got injury issues. And we're talking about Theo Johnson at the time of this recording is missing practice. But Bellinger is just, him as a player, he is kind of the jack of all trades, master of none. Like, he's well-rounded. He's a good blocker. He's a solid blocker in line. He's best as like a move blocker fullback. And people say, oh, well, just use Chapman. Well, when Chapman's in, he is just at fullback. He doesn't give you anything else. Where Bellinger, you can line him up in 4 different places. Chapman, you can only line up 1, which makes the defense easier to prepare for that. And then as a receiver, like you said, he is sure-handed. I mean, catch rates throughout the year, 85%, 89%, 82%. Like, he catches everything that goes his way. He does not drop the ball at all. But part of the caveat with that is he doesn't get targeted anything down the field. In 3 years, he has 0 targets of 20-plus yards, and he only has 10 of 10-plus yards. Everything is between 0 and 10 yards for him, which, hey, he can box out, a defender, and then, again, every time you target him, he's gonna catch it, but he's just not someone who you're gonna target. I mean, even as a rookie, in 2022, he was 37th in tight end receiving yards. You say, well, he missed 5 games. Well, he was 40th of 42 in yards per route run. He was 40th of 42 in average depth of target. Now, he had the highest catch rate in the NFL outside of running backs that year. So, with Bellinger, I think he is the most nuanced player on the team, because there's so many different like you can't just say one thing about Daniel Bellinger without explaining like three different things.
Yeah, and I think the the real thing with Daniel Bellinger is that he's not a threat or an advantage in either the receiving or the blocking game, but he's also not a liability in either, which makes him honestly a perfect tight end too in any offense behind, your big weapon in a tight end. The thing is that Theo Johnson isn't quite yet that big weapon. He's a developmental prospect. He could be that weapon. He has the size and the ability to run down the seam, and he can be a good blocker. He can do all these things, but this is not a Theo Johnson PPP. This is a Daniel Bellinger one. And right now, he's not that. Now, when they had Darren Waller come in, that actually seemed like it was the best place for Daniel Bellinger to just sit right there. And like you're Darren Waller is the guy that you're trying to get the ball and be a receiving. And Daniel Bellinger, him being on the field doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be blocking. He is able to catch the ball out of at multiple different levels and whatever. And it just that year, everything just went to garbage immediately in week 1.
He played a lot with Waller too. Like it wasn't like last year it was like Theo, man, like it really with Waller he played a lot. He actually played more snaps in 23 than his rookie year, despite having Waller on the team. But again, that includes the 5 missed games. But still, it was a 62% versus 72% snap share. And there was only 3 games when he was healthy where he didn't get more than 50% of the snaps with the year with Darren Waller, and the games with Darren Waller playing, he played 36 snaps per game, so his role was not decreased by his role was decreased by Darren Waller, but it was kind of put into what his role probably should be in the NFL. His role has been decreased by Chris Manhertz, you know. But again, this is where I value keeping Daniel Bellinger. And we're putting this episode, we're recording this before cutdown day, and we're putting it out the day after cutdown day. So maybe we have to scrap all this or whatever. But I value keeping Bellinger because in reality, he's your backup tight end. Like I understand that he's the tight end 3 right now, but he is your backup tight end. He's tight end 3, who is your backup tight end.
Yeah, I actually think that his role with Darren Waller is ideal, right? When you have that dynamic playmaker, he fits in perfectly there. He's your do-it-all tight end that can do anything. I think his role is really destroyed not by Chris Manhertz. It's destroyed by Theo Johnson as his direct replacement, another guy that they view as someone that can do all those things.
Here's
Now
where I
you're bringing
disagree with that, though.
Okay.
Is Daniel Bellinger shouldn't be tight end 1.
Well,
So
that's yeah.
like he shouldn't be your starting tight end. So that's where I'm saying I don't think Theo Johnson took his role. I think or took his snaps. I think Chris Manhertz, where they value Chris Manhertz in line. And hey, that could be also be a mistake by the Giants. As much as I like Manhertz blocking, giving him that many more reps as a 0 receiving threat could be a mistake too. Where you should just be giving those to Bellinger, where he is more dynamic, as putting him in the backfield and as a receiver. And maybe that's the conversation we need to be having is like maybe we take Chris Manhertz off the field a little more. But when he's on the field, he is helpful in a sense. You go back to his rookie year. They're 18 points per game without him, 22 with him. That's the difference between 14th and 26th that year. Like the run game struggled without him. He was in line. He was important for them. He was moved to the lead blocker. But that's where I just go. Theo Johnson gets hurt. What's the tight end room without Daniel Bellinger? Chris Manhertz isn't starting. You're gonna put Thomas Finoni out there? You're gonna put Greg Dulcich, who can't block a lick? Like that's where I like to keep Bellinger. Is Theo Johnson is like he's your backup tight end, and I think this Giants in year 4 of this regime should not be cutting guys to save $2 million that are backups at positions.
Yeah, amen, brother. And I would say that there is, for what it is this year, he's certainly somebody that could be upgraded or replaced in 2026 because this is the last year of his rookie deal. But I also think that there's a funny little caveat here in that with Russell Wilson, running the offense this year, he could actually stand to have his best statistical year this year, just eating up stuff and actually be unaffordable for the Giants next year, even if they're looking to replace him anyway. So I think that he has a pretty critical role on this team, just like you said, being the backup when Theo Johnson isn't ready to go or when he's just having a bad stretch.
Yeah, and a critical part of Giants Nation show is body armor, and this episode is brought to you by Body Armor Sports Drink. Rewrite your routine and choose better with Body Armor. Body Armor is real hydration with electrolytes, coconut water, and no artificial dyes, flavors, or sweeteners with great tasting flavors like strawberry banana and orange mango. Body Armor will level up your hydration game. Grab Body Armor Sports Drink today at your local grocery store. Body Armor, choose better. Next year, I'm putting a guy that I like to talk about less than Daniel Bellinger with the Dexter Lawrence PvP because I was like, we got to be quick. And then I was like, I got to explain all this stuff. Dexter Lawrence, 6'4", 342-pound, 27-year-old beast of a nose tackle. He signed a 4-year, $90 million contract in 2023. In his last 3 years, he's been a 2-time All-Pro, 3-time Pro Bowler, and has established himself as a premier player in the NFL after his first 3 years of being a very good player in the NFL. This guy is freaking dominant. He's the best player on the Giants. He's one of the best players in the NFL. He is at worst the second best player at his position, and the only person you could make an argument for is Chris Jones with the Chiefs. This guy's nasty. In 12 games last year, he had his highest career season in sacks. You know what's crazy, though? As good as Dexter Lawrence was last year, it was, in a sense, a down year because of how much he was double teamed. Uh, like I said, he had the sacks, right? He had nine sacks last year, which was a career high over his 7.5. And again, only in 12 games. So he would have had double-digit sacks for the first time. He had 8 tackles for a loss. But he was 13th for defensive tackles and pass rush win rate, 9th in pressure percentage, where he had been kind of, top 5, top 2 in those years before. You say, well, was it a down year because of his play? No, it was, I think, a little more about the Shane Bowen scheme and the way teams played Dexter Lawrence. Those were low numbers for him, which, again, those are great numbers. But he was the most double-team player since double teams have been tracked in 2018 at 63%, which is 11% higher than the second most, double team season, which I do blame Shane Bowen a bit for that. Like, he really didn't do anything to create one-on-ones for Dexter Lawrence. So he was extremely good. He won. He was effective. He put up numbers, but he was double teamed more than ever, and he had some of his lowest numbers and like pass rush metrics in his 3 seasons since becoming elite.
The Giants can take a victory lap on Dexter Lawrence in a bunch of different ways. Number one, in drafting him, Dave Gettleman, for whatever we want to complain about Dave Gettleman, taking him 17th overall when a lot of draft analysts pegged this guy as a 2-down run stuffer were just flat wrong. I don't know if they just didn't watch the film or if they just were banking on his side or whatever. I don't know what it was, but it didn't look that way to me. And he certainly has not become a 2-down run stuffer in the NFL. Literally the opposite of that. We sit here talking about, Abdul Carter and like the Giants now have the problem of who are you taking off the field on third down? That's quite literally the problem that they have right now. So that's number one. His ability right now, what we're talking about him as being at worst the second best defensive tackle in the league, and Joe Shane deserves a round of applause for the contract extension he gave him because the $21 million AAV makes him the 11th highest paid defensive tackle and 3rd in cap hit among defensive tackles. So you got him, I don't want to say at a bargain, but you're not paying the number one price for what is arguably the number one defensive tackle out there. And they got it done early and got it out of the way. Now they've had to tinker with that contract a couple times, but that has to do with a million other things. And
I think we're a year away from him wanting a new one too, because I thought that might have even happened this offseason. Like and hey, give it to him, right? Like this is not a player you should be playing hard. Just give it to him because he's just going to cost you more if you wait another year to get something done with him. Like he is clearly a premier player. He's got the respect of everybody in the NFL. Like I said, like imagine in 12 games you put up 9 sacks, 8 tackles for a loss, 5 quarterback hits, 21 pressures, and you're the most double team player in the NFL. Ever since that's been recorded and in what that's 8 seasons, and it's 11% higher, and you're like, yeah, not as good as the past years, like it's kind of crazy. Like we're in 2023 at 4.5 sacks, 14 quarterback hits, and 45 pressures. So total sacks, hits, pressures was 4th for defensive tackles, only behind Aaron Donald, Chris Jones, and Quinnen Williams. In 2022. He was 2nd in the NFL for that number, only after Chris Jones. He was 1st in quarterback hits by 7. Like, he's just been a freaking monster since 2022, where again, he is the Giants' best player, not just now, but like in a long, long time. Like he's a better player than I think the only really guy you can argue with over the last 10 years is like Odell at his prime was on a Hall of Fame trajectory. There's really he's the only guy you can make that argument for in a long time for the Giants since maybe Strahan.
Oh, I absolutely agree, and I think another victory lap can be Brian Dable and Andre Pat Brian Dable's hiring of Andre Patterson has unlocked a lot of what makes Dexter Lawrence great, and you could just look at where they lined him up, where they chose to line up. Now he's been through different defensive coordinators, but, in 2020 in 2019, you're looking at, mostly B gap. 61% of his, snap counts is at the B gap.
And I'll even make this quicker for you. Sorry, but like nose tackle percentage as a rookie, 27%.
Mhm.
2020, 11%. 2021, 5%. That shoots up to 65% in 2022, 72% in 2023. Now, the addition of Shane Bowen did reduce that a little bit. It went down to 60%. Now something that I picked up on preseason, where he went from playing all of that in preseason the 2 years before to none, or to a little less. Patterson kind of says, I do what I do, but, Bowen obviously is running the schemes. So, but what you said, where Patterson got a hold of him and just got him to use his hands better, use his length better, where he just fires off the ball, he takes up that mass, he benches offensive linemen off, and he keeps his hands working, he just keeps hands off of him while keeping his feet moving, and has just put it together to be just flat out elite. I mean, we're talking about his pass rush win rate went from 7.3%, 10.2, 11.7, which those are good numbers, to 17.8%, 20.2%, and then last year 12.5, which, like I said, is, to double teams. 10 sacks in his first 3 seasons to 21 in the last three, and that includes missing more games. Quarterback hits his first 3 years, goes 6, 6, 9 to 22, 15, and then 5 last year. Like, he's just made so many things. And this is only talking about him as a pass rusher, too. Like, as a run defender, the ability to two gap is better than anybody in the NFL. He had, third in run stop rate, fifth in total tackles for defensive tackles the year before last, eighth in stops. Like, he's just a monster.
And I think where Giants fans can be a little bit excited, we talked about the dip from 2023 in the A gap to 2024, going from 72% down to 60%. Here's where the difference is. They moved him outside the tackle again. Early on in his career with the Giants, he spent, 11%, 22%, 31% either over tackle or outside the tackle. And then that went down to 2 and 3% with Wink Martindale. With Shane Bowen, it moved back up to 9%. Here's the deal. The addition of, with Brian Burns looking like he looks this summer, with Kayvon Thibodeau still under contract, and now with the addition of Abdul Carter, I think that there's that 9% outside over tackle, not no snaps outside of tackle. If you attribute that back to the A gap, you're back up to 69%, and you're right back in the wheelhouse of where he was, the previous 2 years.
Well, let's do like projection talk with him. You know what I think helps him more than anything? Abdul Carter. Because when Brian Burns was out, it's like, oh, well, now he's not going to get double teams. It's like he didn't get double teams in Carolina, and they played a very similar defense where he had wide rushes, right? So, like, the fact that they aligned Kayvon and Brian Burns so wide really didn't help Dexter Lawrence's cause. Like, they didn't do anything to create one-on-ones for Dexter Lawrence, and it showed.
Well, I mean, and that speaks to what Brian Burns is and what the position is, right? Because it's either going to be a speed rush, which you can use with chip block, help with a tight end or a running back, or he's going to do a spin move, which 50% of the time just doesn't work. You know what I mean? Whereas with Abdul Carter, you're going to get a completely different thing. So go on.
Well, that's what I'm saying. With Abdul Carter, you're going to line him up all over the place, and you're going to be looking to get two sets of hands on him. Where, as much as I like Brian Burns, teams are not putting a premium on getting two sets of hands on Brian Burns. Like you said, they'll give a little tight end chip when he's lined up wide, but that's part of just the fact that they line him up wide. So on third down, they'll give a little chip on the tight end, but he's not that guy. Kayvon's not either. He's a step below. Abdul has the ability to be that guy, and the fact that you can line up Abdul all over the formation, that is going to make it just so much harder pre-snap setting their protections, and once they're at the line, or in the huddle, and then once they're at the line, being like, man, where do we set this towards? Like, who do we put the premium on putting the back on this guy up in the A gap? Like, there's gonna be times where a center is looking at Dexter Lawrence and Abdul Carter, and they're lined up on both of his shoulders. So that's where I think Dexter Lawrence can take his game to another game. I think his sack numbers with Shane Bowen will benefit, where because I think he has the more of ability to clean up. Where in Wake Martindale teams were just getting the ball out super quick, where having Burns and Kayvon and now Carter working around the corners will force some pressure, force some quarterbacks in the decks, and so his sack numbers will stay high. I don't think he's ever going to be like an Aaron Donald, Chris Jones, who's having like 12, 13 every year, but I do think he's going to have more high sack numbers. I just would like to see there be more of a premium of trying to get this guy one-on-ones, because that's how Aaron Donald, despite being as amazing as he was able to put up consistent numbers. It wasn't just because he's just great. It's because the Rams said, hey, we got this great player. Let's figure out ways to give this guy matchups, where they would line him up inside of the tackle shoulder and have a defensive end on the outside of the tackle shoulder, and just would force them to do different things with their protection. So that's where I want to see Dexter Lawrence. Projection wise this year, but have in a sense a better season, is don't let teams just so easily double team him. And that was the case, is where teams were like, we could just put two sets of hands on him and they're not really going to do anything to stop us from doing that.
Yeah, I think in short, it's just that Abdul Carter can do a lot of different things, and it forces you to have to think really hard about what you're doing, which is exactly what Dexter Lawrence does. Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns don't offer you that. So I think that, and it's funny because while the pressure rates went down for him in Shane Bowen's system, the sack numbers went up. So, and I think that's going to continue to happen. And I think that Dexter Lawrence, provided that he comes off of the dislocated elbow with no hiccups whatsoever, which I think we're both taking as a given right now. I think that 2025 is looking up for Dexter Lawrence.
Absolutely. All right, you got anything else on Dex?
Nope.
All right, that's an episode. One more player profile and projection coming out tomorrow. Russell Wilson, the quarterback one for the New York Giants. We'll see you then. Until then, let's go Big Blue.